All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's great to see everybody's faces on a Monday. All right, Ms. Contra, let's call this meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. Welcome, board members. Good to see you. All right, moving on to section 2, opening exercises. Ms. Rooks, would you mind leading us in a moment of silence and pledge allegiance?
If I could ask,
Go ahead. I was going to make an ask. Go ahead.
if we could ask for a moment of silence and thoughts and prayers for Mr. Moss, the teacher at Front Elementary. I don't know if that's what you were going to say too. Okay.
Thank you. All right, moving on to address the agenda. 3.1, address agenda and consider adoption or recommend changes. We do have an update tied to our agenda. Dr. Reynolds, I'm going to allow you to kind of give us that update.
All right, thank you very much. Good evening, President Sandoval, board members, community members, and guests. Before we begin, I want to share an update regarding tonight's agenda. While we still have presentations, discussions, and public comment that are going to take place, I need to recommend that we postpone taking any action on any of the regular meeting action items on this agenda. Unfortunately, we had a clerical error in one of the locations where the agenda was posted, and out of abundance of caution, feel it's best for the board to postpone regular meeting action items until we can ensure that all items are properly noticed in accordance with Arizona's open meeting law. I think most of our community knows that we strive to be thorough and transparent when posting our information regarding governing board meetings. Even though most locations where the agenda date is posted are correct, after conferring with attorneys, we do not want the one place where we had that clerical error to jeopardize the legitimacy of any governing board action. In addition, we know many patrons are here and planning to listen, watch, and participate, so we want to honor your time and still hold the meeting as discussion items. Our attorneys have also informed us that in a future agenda item, we can ratify any of the executive session adjournment or the approval of the agenda. So thank you for your understanding and your patience, and we apologize for the clerical error.
Thank you for that, Dr. Reynolds. Board members, do you have any questions around that? Good. All right, with that said, I do need a motion to postpone the consent agenda to a future meeting and move agenda items 8.1 to consideration only and 8.2 to discussion only, and move the executive session immediately following 11.2. I'll move that we postpone the consent agenda to a future meeting, move agenda items 8.1 to consideration only, 8.2 to discussion only, and move executive session immediately following 11.2.
I will second.
All right, Ms. Contra, we have a motion made by myself and a second made by Mrs. Rooks. Board members, please cast your votes. Motion passes with 5 yeas. Thank you, board members. All right, moving on to recognitions, 4.1. Ms. Ari.
President Sandoval, members of the board, no formal recognitions from me this evening.
All right, thank you. All right, 4.2, board comments. Mrs. Hill.
Yes, actually, I wanted to again reiterate what our school motto is, which is every student, every day, except for the girls. And I'd also like to say that, excuse me, I'd also like to recite, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble and sin by leading him away from my teaching, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the depth of the sea. Matthew 18:6.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill. Dr. Sorensen.
No, sir.
Mrs. Rooks.
That your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. 1 Corinthians 2:5. I was honored to attend the Peoria Flex Academy graduation on Friday. I want to say thank you to Mrs. Jacob and the staff for inviting me to attend. It was incredibly moving and inspiring to see the students on the stage and their families in the audience. Dr. Reynolds, you were there too. That was pretty cool to see the excitement, and I know Mrs. Ewing, you were there as well. So I know there's a lot of graduations this week, so I want to give a shout out to all of the students graduating and all of their excitement that they have moving forward into their future, to their parents who helped them through the last couple years of their high school experience, and also to all the staff in the district for helping those students as well. And right now, for me, I feel the same with Mrs. Hill, that every student every day except the girls right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Rooks. Mrs. Ewing.
Thank you. I had the privilege to be at the Peoria Flex Academy graduations. I got to help award the Olivia Delgado Scholarship Foundation to one of the Peoria Flex Academy graduates, and also was invited to participate in handing out the awards to 3 students over at Peoria High School as well as they are part of their graduation. So that was really exciting. I also had the privilege recently of participating in honoring and presenting awards at the Pride of Peoria to all of those recipients. It was a great event. Danielle Airy, your staff for putting that together. And it was really great to be amongst all of those individuals. I also participated, and it's really exciting that the Peoria Flex Academy is doing it's what's called Powwow. It's produce on wheels without waste. They've done that twice so far and hope to continue that in the fall. So I got to do some volunteer work over there, and that was great. And it's a great opportunity for those students who need volunteer hours. Also, a special thank you to all the staff retiring this year. I was able to attend the retirement reception and got a chance to talk to all of those who have 20 plus years at the district. So it was really great to hear their stories and hear what their next steps are. And thank you to Mr. Molino, Kevin Reese, Carter Davidson, Kathleen Leonard, and Dr. Marshall Walters for reviewing the student and faculty safety processes that the district does have in place. And I appreciate that the PUSD has methods that are science-based, data-driven, and are based on the best practices in the industry. Best of luck this week. I know a lot of our students have finals. Our seniors had finals last week. Congratulations to the seniors on their graduation this week, and the 8th graders who are promoting. And I appreciate all the staff for all of their hard work this year. And I don't know if you'll be mentioning this, but I did see that Peoria has a record number of scholarships this year that were awarded, 78 million, I think, increasing in scholarships from last year. So we, some of the high schools that broke the records were Centennial, Ironwood, Liberty, Raymond S. Callis, Sunrise Mountain, and I believe at Peoria Flex Academy, this was the first year that they had scholarships for those students, so that's pretty exciting as well. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ewing. Yeah, I just have a couple items. The Pride of Peoria event is one of the activities that is definitely a highlight of the year. It recognizes individuals who are recognized by their peers, so it's a big deal. And just seeing the number of individuals who walk across that stage, again, that are making such an impact not only on our students but also on their peers. It's really neat to see the result of just how our teachers and staff really truly collaborate on a daily basis to ensure that all of our students are put in a position to be successful. Great event, and like I said, it's one of the highlights of the year for sure. Also attended the retirement celebration that we had as a district at Centennial. It is always an honor to be in the presence of individuals who, for 20, I think some 30 plus years, if I'm not mistaken, really intentionally woke up every day to lift up others, our youth, and prepare them to really navigate their own path in a confident way. So it was an honor to be there. It was also a lot of gratitude in how some of those individuals are going to come back to the district to continue to serve and certainly continue to mentor some of our younger teachers. So great event as well. All right, Dr. Reynolds.
Thank you, President Sandoval, Governing Board, Cabinet, and guests. Yes, the Peoria Unified School District proudly celebrates the class of 2023 for securing just over $78 million in scholarships to post-secondary institutions. This breaks our previous scholarship record by more than $5 million. I also want to recognize 2 Peoria Unified High School students who were 2023 National Merit finalists. Congratulations to E.J. Esmus from Centennial High School and Madeline Williams from Sunrise Mountain High School on earning the National Merit Scholarship. The National Merit Scholarship Corporation will name the remainder of this year's recipients on June 7th and July 10th, so we'll be sure to keep you posted on any additional winners. Another congratulations to seniors E.J. Esmus and Kylie Wojak for becoming first ever Centennial Coyotes to earn the Global Seal of Biliteracy. E.J. and Kylie had to pass 4 assessment of performance towards proficiency in language, fluency tests in their native language, as well as 1 additional language, which was French, to earn the seal. I'd also like to offer congratulations to Kaylee Setka and Anthony Tarantino, who passed the AAPPL tests and will receive their seals later this month. This month, the Peoria High School Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement, or MESA teams took part in the Arizona State MESA Day competition held at Grand Canyon University. The competition hosted 36 schools, and Peoria High won the 3rd place team trophy. This was Peoria High School's 28th time being in the top 3 in the team's 31-year history. Peoria High's junior MESA team also competed, and every student on both teams won a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd place medal. If you are unfamiliar with the MESA program, it's a program designed to inspire students to excel in the areas of STEM. We want to congratulate Peoria High School MESA teams, the MESA team, the junior MESA team, as well as their advisor, Mr. David Hill. We also want to congratulate Mr. Jacob Holliday for Peoria High being named Administrator of the Year by the Arizona Interscholastic Association. Mr. Holliday serves as the Athletic Director at Peoria High School and is an integral part of student-athlete success. Thank you, Mr. Holliday, for going above and beyond as an administrator to serve your campus and all the students and staff and families there. So again, congratulations. And I, too, want to wish all of our seniors good luck as we celebrate graduations, PFA starting last week, as a few of our board members mentioned, and then the rest of them this week at State Farm Stadium. So we'll be very excited to celebrate with the graduates, their families, and their friends. That concludes my comments.
All right, thank you, Dr. Reynolds. All right, moving on to Section 5, public comments, requests to address the governing board regarding matters not included on the agenda. As always, we'll spend 30 minutes on this line item, 3 minutes per individual. I just want to reiterate, please refrain from any just outbursts and conversations while another is speaking. More than welcome to take the conversation out in the lobby, come back in, but sometimes it's hard for us to be able to hear what another is saying, and I'm sure others would like to hear very clearly what's being said from individuals at the podium or from a board member. So thank you for that in advance. All right. First public comment comes from, and I'm going to totally, hopefully I don't mess up this name. It's, looks like it's Deal, is it Holquin? Is that correct? Do I have that name right? Last name is Holquin, I believe. Maybe out. So, well, actually, it's Diego, is that correct? Diego, how are you? So Diego has a slip filled out, so it'll really be he speaking at the podium, ma'am. Yeah, and you can stand behind the podium there, sir, so you can speak into the mic, so we can hear you. You're perfect. Welcome.
Hello. So I want to address my concern. I have not been heard at all at my school. No matter what I talk about, I have been, no teacher has spoke to me about the stuff I'm going through. And no matter what I do, I go to my principal, nothing has been talked about what's going on. I have been discouraged at all, no matter what I say. And what I mean by that is no matter what I do in my classroom, the teacher it's very rude to me and very disrespectful towards me. She segregates me from the class. And I just want to be acknowledged in the classroom and be known to the class.
May I speak with you?
Can my mother speak?
Well, actually, it's if you have a slip filled out, and I can.
do.
You do?
Yeah. I do.
We all do.
Okay, so, we randomly select, so, but,
There's no conflict of interest management. He's trying to say there's no conflict of interest management at his school. That's what he's trying to get across.
Yeah. It's just every time I try and voice my concern, it's the same thing. I try to speak to my principal about it, and no matter what, it's never been done and dealt with. And it's just been really hard because I try to talk to my teacher and communicate with my teacher all the time. And no matter what, she interrupts me. And when I try to speak, interrupts me. She raises her voice towards me. I try to be respectful as I can, no matter what. And she just doesn't listen to me at all. And it's very hard on me as a student of my school. And no matter what I do, nothing's done. And I've been dealing with this for about 2 years now with the teacher. I tried to, 4 months prior to get out of that class. I was told that I was supposed to take the class due to my learning disability. And I was lied to later on because I found out the truth was I can take other classes. It wasn't mandatory. So that's pretty much it.
President Sandoval?
yes,
Diego? Is that
yes, correct.
Yes, sir.
Diego, I'm going to ask Dr. Carter Davidson to talk with you.
Okay. Can my mother come with me?
Of course, yeah.
I feel like I'm in a Dr. Seuss book right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Diego, thank you for taking the time. That took a lot of courage. All right, next public comment comes from Carter Ashton.
President Sandoval, members of the board, thank you for listening to me speak. I've come here because of some concerns that have been addressed in numerous previous board meetings and something that I disagree with wholeheartedly. There's been this witch hunt, in my opinion, of students who are transgender within the Peoria school district. And I think it's all based on a lot of fear-mongering, a lot of lying and manipulation of the media and manipulation of certain stories. And this idea that's being pushed heavily disregards the safety of the trans students. You know, it's, this movement is based on protecting the girls at our school, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Of course, we should protect everyone, but it fails to acknowledge the fact that these students who are transgender are also in danger every day that they attend school. Most of these people, they say that they wish for the safety of every student, but their words don't reflect that. And they use a lot of wording towards these students to make them seem less human. They give them labels that are based in ideas, something that's faceless, something that's a concept that you cannot humanize because it makes it easier for them to hate these students. It makes it easier to see them as a target instead of a person. A lot of these concerns are based on transgender girls in the restrooms, in the women's restrooms at these schools. And the idea is being pushed that they only do this because they want to prey on the female students. They want to do something sinful, if you will. But the idea is so hateful and so ignorant, and it's so disregarding of the fact that these are humans and they just want to live their life and live their truth and be comfortable within their own skin. It's a matter of, it's very hard for each side to understand what the other side is saying. And I do want to say to the parents here tonight and the parents watching this, you don't attend these schools. You don't know the day-to-day life. You don't know how these kids are treated. And if you were treated like these kids, you wouldn't be able to handle it. These kids are barked at, they're called names, they're pushed around, they're shoved. Anything you can think of, you name it, it happens.
Mr. Ashton, thank you for your time. I appreciate your courage.
Thank you very much.
Next public comment comes from Kendall Black. Let me see if she has a red slip in here. Okay.
Hello. I'm just going to start talking. So I would also like to address the same issue as my friend Carter because I also attend high school. I'm a graduating senior this year. And there has been a complete ignorance and perpetuation of the realities that these transgender girls face. They are in women's restrooms because they are safe there. They are in these situations where they're being bullied, like my friend said, barked at, called slurs every single day of their life. They're walking into an environment that is unsafe. They're walking into an environment where people carry on the opinions of their parents, which are ones of hatred and misinformation about what a transgender person is. A transgender girl is not someone who's coming into a women's bathroom to prey upon a woman or to prey upon someone else. They're going into there because that is what they are. They identify as a woman, and they are a woman, and there are many scientific studies to back up that, but at the end of the day, they're there because it is the safest place for them. And it is completely mind-boggling to me that as parents, you'll use, and as board members, some board members, not all, you'll use the motto, every student, every day, to harm some students that don't fit the category of students you think deserve safety and love. And I think that is a complete endangering a very, maybe not large, but a very present population of students. And I would like to say, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. John 13:34. But if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. James 2:8-9. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they are going because the darkness has blinded them. John 2:11. And I question, how blinded are these people by their prejudice? How blinded are these people by institutions which perpetuate this prejudice? How blinded are you by the fact that these are young students, children, that you are turning into predators? They are not predators. They are children, just trying to become safe and confident in their own identity, just as all these other kids are. And as a student, there is no incident, and maybe there is in some state across the world, there's always an incident where a man will enter a bathroom and prey upon women. But these transgender kids are just trying to live their lives and present their identity just as every other child, and I believe they deserve that right just as you and I do. That is all.
Ms. Schneider, thank you for your time and your courage. Next public comment comes from Ms. Corrine Haynes. Okay, let me just find a slip for her, ma'am. Okay. Welcome, Ms. Brackett.
Okay. Hello. Okay, besides Heather Rooks and Rebecca Hill, who do their jobs and goes by their oath they signed, I am speaking to the superintendent and specific board members. You refuse to put a bathroom policy in place to protect the girls here at PUSD. You refuse to do your jobs that we ask of you. You refuse to abide by your oath you signed for this position. And on behalf of Arizona citizens and I, Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Ewing, Mr. Sorensen, and Mr. David Sandoval, you are served.
Thank you, Ms. Brackett. You can hand it to Ms. Contra there. She'll hand him to us. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Next public comment comes from Ms. Trina Berg. Welcome, Ms. Berg.
Welcome, thank you. President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds, cabinet. My name is Trina Berg. I'm a teacher and parent in this district. I just want to start out by saying beliefs should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. First, I want to say thank you to all the teachers that my son has had once again and has made his school year amazing. Everyone from his classroom teachers, his specials, his cross-country, his cross-country coach, STUCO teachers, advisors, sorry, everyone. He is sad about leaving school, very excited about summer. It's kind of a mixed bag. He already is looking forward to next year because he knows who his teacher is going to be. He's very excited about it. I want to say this is a very interesting year for me personally. This is my last year of kids that I had in middle school or their siblings or whatever that are now graduating high school. So I'm now like out of middle school kids that I had. So I don't have the whole like I've known you for 6 years of your life kind of thing. It's kind of weird. I want to say thank you again to all of the choir teachers, band teachers, and everything for all the end of the year performances. It's a lot of time and effort that goes into that, and I still don't understand how my son's band teacher taught him how to play a trumpet. I don't understand. It was really quite amazing from December until May. So again, I want to thank everyone. This has been a very rough year. I think for everybody, I think we can all agree this has been a very rough year. Very different rough than like COVID years rough. It's just been a rough year. We're in need of a break. Everyone's kind of tired. But I do want to say thank you to our students that have stood up and spoken tonight. I appreciate you very much because there are those of us that are fighting, but we need more of you to fight with us. And I really appreciate the fact that you stand up here and you speak the truth. I just want to say thank you. I am so incredibly proud of our students who do that because this is not an easy place to stand up. And I agree that, our board members you guys took an oath. You guys have a board of ethics. You guys have kind of rules and regulations to live by. And I agree that every single board member should be abiding by those. I think we all need to do better. We just need to do better. There was something else I was going to say. It's been a long day, told you. Congratulations to all the graduates, definitely. That's a thing. These are our COVID freshmen, right? So started the year of COVID and ending the year with as much of a normal high school experience as we could have provided. So congratulations to all the graduates. And I want to say thank you because we are starting to get back our ACT scores. And I know speaking at our school, we saw growth in our ACT scores. We have record, scholarships. And I want to showcase that that's our students learning and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we are getting there. We're getting back on track. And we're starting to fill those gaps from all of those years. So again, thank you to everyone, and that is my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berg. Next public comment comes from Sloan Adams. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Sloan Adams, Desert Regional Manager for Turning Point USA Faith. Our Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. To that end, it is the responsibility of this school board and all other duly elected government bodies to recognize their preeminent and primary role to secure and protect the God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Similarly, the Apostle Paul in Romans writes, "The authorities are God's servants, sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish you. They are God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong." Unfortunately, members of this board are neither securing the God-given rights of the students and families of this community, nor are they defending the innocent entrusted to their care. In fact, instead of punishing what is wrong, or even having a policy in place to create clarity for the staff and faculty to enforce, they are choosing the broad way that leads to destruction. For by not having a clearly defined policy in regards to the bathrooms, the place where students are at their most vulnerable, they are playing Russian roulette with the safety of our kids. To quote author Abigail Schreier, "I have no doubt educators and school boards who implement gender identity and sexual orientation education are sincerely concerned about the welfare of LGBTQ identified students, as all decent human beings ought to be. But where a measure taken to fix a problem goes so far in excess of remedy, it becomes clear that simple remedy was not primarily what the fixer had in mind." Members of the board, I implore you to do the sensible thing and have a policy in place. Boys in boys' bathrooms, girls in girls' bathrooms. And if bullying is the fear, then simply tell those bullies, knock it off. We don't treat people that way. Go to detention. Go see the principal. It really is that simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Next public comment comes from Jerry Vance. Off- uh, Let me see if, I know her slip was already pulled. Let me see if, you know what, Ms. Haynes does not have a slip. She actually used her slip to defer her time to another. I apologize. Welcome, Ms. Vance.
Thank you. Whereas the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, would not take a stand to keep the boys out of areas designated for girls' bathroom and locker rooms. And whereas the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, did not take into account the fear and possible harm that would come from allowing boys into girls' bathrooms and locker rooms. And whereas the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, chose not to listen to or be responsive to the people, parents, and would prefer to serve the federal government over the people of Arizona, those that elected them to serve on the school board, Peoria School Board. And whereas the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, broke their oaths to serve and protect the Constitution of the state of Arizona and the parents and people of Peoria that elected them to the Peoria School Board. And whereas the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, should hold no allegiance to the federal government over the rights of the people, parents, and the Constitution of Arizona. Now therefore, be it resolved, we, the precinct committeemen and committeemen of LD 27, have come together to censure the 3 board members of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen as well. Now therefore, be it resolved, we, the precinct committeemen and committeewomen of LD 27, have come together to censure the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, for breaking their oaths to the Arizona State Constitution and the people, parents of Peoria as well. Now therefore, be it resolved, we, the precinct committeemen and committeewomen of LD 27, have come together to censure the majority of the Peoria School Board, David Sandoval, Melissa Ewing, Bill Sorensen, for the harmful actions that they have agreed to commit against the girls who have the rights to safety and private bathroom and locker rooms as it is guaranteed to them in the Arizona State Constitution, Article 2, Section 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vance. Next public comment comes from Ms. Laura Tepasan.
Good evening,
Welcome.
President Sandoval, board members, Dr. Reynolds, and guests. Non scholae sed vitae, said Seneca. We do not learn for school, but for life. I would like to express incredible words of gratitude, to say simple, honest, and sincere thank you to all teachers and administration at Frontier Elementary. You are the best. My daughter's journey started in first grade, meeting two incredible ladies, educators, principal, Mrs. Lori Little, and first grade teacher, Miss Ball, and continue with dedicated teachers like Mrs. Duford, Miss Underhill, and then the amazing teams of Principal Statsman and its 5th, 6th, my favorite 7th, and 8th grade teachers, and his office team of awesome ladies. Thank you for teaching, assisting, and being a leader today and any day. I have admired and appreciated the respectful attitude towards your students and their families. One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world and make it better. You all have shown leadership. In fact, leadership is not about a title or a designation. It is about impact, influence, and inspiration. You are a role model, and being a role model is the most powerful form of educating. Teachers at Frontier, you have offered a great academic curriculum with many interesting, appropriate, and full of fun and learning activities, caring for your students and going above and beyond teaching math and English. I will never forget Mrs. Ball tea at the White House or writing and receiving frozen letters and packages from the North Pole. At Frontier, you have always honored the role of families, and you play very well your role as educator. Either called social, emotional, or life skills, the expectation that students learn to practice self-control, navigate social situations, and empathize with others is as old as education itself. Continue to spread the passion you have for your work in your classrooms and getting amazing results by also teaching your students that nothing is impossible when you put your heart and mind into it. Thank you, Mr. Moss, for greeting your students daily upon arrival at Frontier and departure at Coyote Hills by playing beautiful violin music. You are an inspiration and extraordinary teacher who has touched many people's chords. Mr. Moss creates connections with his students and long-lasting memories both inside and out of music. He truly is a remarkable teacher. We are thinking of him and sending healing thoughts. Not all superheroes have capes. Some have teaching degrees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stephenson. Four minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have time for just a couple more public comments. Next public comment is from David Barron.
Good evening. I'm a substitute school bus driver for the district. I retired from driving full-time on March 18, 2023, necessitated by an increasing requirement to receive medical care for injuries received on the fire department. While I'm a retired firefighter paramedic with a good pension, I elected to remain as a substitute bus driver to assist the needs of the transportation department between medical procedures. My years spent both in the military and on the fire department have given me an appreciation for true teamwork under trying conditions and a satisfaction of when it all comes together. This is why I elected to stay, is the people that I work with. I'd like to share my frustrating experiences, however, to remain as a substitute driver and the misleading information on the substitute bus driver job posting indicating an experience incentive that staff fails to put in place on hire. I have reviewed meeting agendas and listened to many board meetings on YouTube to find the original discussions and board understandings on this issue as it was presented before that vote. That vote took place on October 14th, 2021. Is it possible to schedule a meeting with the board to bring this to your attention and to seek direction to have the board clarify the incentives listed on the job posting, specifically the 1% increase for each year of experience up to 10 years due to the position being a hard to fill position. It would be most helpful if you could take the opportunity to review that meeting video from hour 1.53, 1 hour 53 minutes, where it starts to 2 hours and 30 minutes, where the board votes unanimously for the increase in the incentives. Then please review and read the substitute bus driver job posting, which is separate from the full-time job posting, and click the hyperlink to the salary schedule for that very specific position. At no time, nor in subsequent meetings into 2023, is the lack of incentives broken out for the board understanding and consideration before the vote. While at full-time, my pay was $21.84, but the sub position knocked me to $17 an hour. When contemplating the sub position, the incentives as posted made up for some of that loss. to have that taken away by staff fiat, and then to be told that I was not going to be allowed to take advantage of the Arizona State Retirement System 2020 rule at all, was a walkaway decision. I was told in writing that I was limited to 18 hours a week, period, for the first year. When I asked to see the policy, I was told that it wasn't a policy, but a procedure. When I asked to see that in writing, I was given nothing, as it was not written down. Others, from my experience, have walked away rather than consider subbing. I'm only one of three.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
thank you, sir. I appreciate your time. All right, final public comment comes from Ms. Shelley Bond.
Hi, my name's Shelley Bond. I was actually hoping I didn't get called now because my intention was to allot my time to someone else. So I'm going to try not to get too emotional. To the students who spoke earlier, I feel what you feel. I understand that you guys are going through something. We all the adults in here have went through high school. It might have been what you guys are experiencing. Boy, we've all experienced things in high school. It's not, there's so many adversities in life. I mean, there really are. And I understand this is a hard thing for you guys. I spoke at the city council meeting a week or two ago, trying not to come from an emotional point. I'm a construction worker. I work in the construction industry. OSHA regulates everything nationwide for all adult or teenage workers. And they have regulations about every single thing possible, including bathrooms. I don't have the cards in front of me like I read at the city council meeting because I didn't plan on speaking, but just basically to summarize it without knowing the exact numbers, OSHA requires that all construction job sites provide separate restrooms for male and female, with the exception of single-use J-John stalls that can be locked from the inside and out, single use. However, OSHA follows up by saying, always the best practice, no matter what, is to provide separate restrooms, separate facilities for male and females, plain and simple. We put that protection for the safety and health of all of our workforce across the United States. It is a no-brainer to me why we don't put that protection in place for our youth across the United States. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Bond. All right, that concludes public comment for this evening. We will now move. Ms. Contra, if I refresh my screen, will that move the action items to discussion?
Yes, sir, it should. They do appear under 9, section 9 now.
All right, let me do that real quick just to make sure I'm calling out the correct line items. Okay, moving on to 9.1, consideration and possible adoption of a resolution ordering and authorizing all matters necessary for a bond election to be held on November 7th, 2023. If this resolution is so adopted, the deadline for submitting arguments with respect to it is August 11th, 2023 at 5 p.m. Ms. Myers, welcome.
And President Sandoval, just as a reminder, right, this is for consideration discussion only.
Yes, sir.
Yes, well, good evening, President Sandoval, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Reynolds, and community. Tonight's agenda item is a follow-up to the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendation that was presented to the Governing Board on May 11th, and direction to administration related to a resolution for a possible bond election in November. This evening, I would like to introduce guests that we have joining us. We have Mr. Paul Gales with the law firm Greenberg and Traurig. He is the district's bond attorney. We also have Ms. Randy Stein and Mr. Brian Lundberg from Stiefel. They're managing directors with that firm. And Stiefel serves as the district's bond underwriter. So I'd like to acknowledge that they're here with me this evening to provide answers to any questions that the governing board may have. And so with that, I'll move on. You'll recall at the last board meeting, the governing board approved a motion to direct administration to work with legal counsel and our professional advisors to bring forward the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendation related to a $250 million bond authorization in the form of a resolution for consideration and approval by the governing board. At the May 11th meeting, administration also shared that there were a number of considerations that served as a framework for the committee's recommendation. This included reviewing priority and essential elementary and high school projects, security, technology, transportation, and related needs, and understanding that funding is not available for those types of projects in our annual capital allocations, but rather would qualify under a bond authorization. The team also looked at the district's tax rate, assessed valuation, property taxes, and bonding capacity. Another consideration was the district's demographics and enrollment projections for not only in the near term, but the next 10 years. At the same meeting, administration reviewed secondary property taxes on residential and commercial property in the district that support both our 13% M&O override as well as our 2012 bond authorization, bond sales, and prior bond sales that are still being amortized. We did note that in fiscal year 2023, the bond secondary tax rate is 0.8758 per $100 of limited assessed valuation, and the combined secondary tax rate is 2.2311 per $100 of limited assessed valuation. The graph on this slide demonstrates that in recent years, the district's secondary tax rate has been decreasing over time. Information was also provided to the governing board regarding the district's current outstanding bond sales, assessed valuation of taxable property, or bonding capacity at this point in time, credit rating, and related information. The Citizens Advisory Committee met throughout the spring and came forward with a recommendation for a $250 million bond authorization that was based primarily on $208 million of facility maintenance projects, technology, safety, transportation, and related needs that were presented by the district to the committee, as well as new elementary school construction at the Meadows and another northern elementary parcel in the district, as well as new construction for an academic building at Liberty High School. The amount also includes funding to purchase land for a future high school when it becomes available from a developer or from the state of Arizona through auction. The district would reduce the total cost with an annual capital funding allocation in addition to school facilities oversight grants totaling $38.6 million and $8 million respectively for the grants to bring the total from $296.6 million to the $250 million total. This amount was a threshold that the committee discussed, in part because they did not want to have an amount that would cause a tax rate increase, and the $250 million amount does not result in a tax rate increase for the district. It was also previously shared that this dollar amount for an authorization could be managed in conjunction with existing bond sales that are being amortized. Again, you'll see that this chart shows existing bond sales, the bars in blue, and a new bond authorization would be the gray bars. And as that existing bond sale amount comes down, the new bond authorization would come into play, and as you can see, it's flat and then decreasing over time. If there is a bond election with an authorization, it's projected that the first bond sale would take place in early 2024. The tax rate impact of future bond sales and existing outstanding bond sales is also included in the resolution document that the governing board will consider at a future board meeting for approval, and it demonstrates that there would not be a tax rate increase under a new bond authorization at the $250 million amount. On May 11th, administration shared with the governing board this slide detailing the bond categories and approved total amounts for elementary projects, high school projects, including safety and technology, new construction, and a future land purchase for a new high school, as well as pupil transportation vehicles, all totaling the $250 million amount. That same information that was presented on May 11th is included in the resolution that is attached to this agenda item, and it mirrors what was recommended from the governing board and would be included in the voter information pamphlet if the governing board were to call formally for an election by approving the resolution at a future meeting. And with that, this concludes the presentation. Again, due to the change in the agenda for tonight's meeting, administration is available to answer your questions with our professional advisors, and the resolution will be brought back for governing board action at a future board meeting. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Board members, questions, comments? Actually, I'm going to press pause there. We do have 3 public comments tied to this line item. So Ms. Myers will go through those and then we'll get into board member questions and comments. Thank you. All right. First public comment comes from Ms. Jenna Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, good evening. I'm Jenna Johnson, and I am a public school educator of 15 years, a parent, and a Peoria resident. And currently, I do not support Peoria Unified placing a bond on the ballot. It appears from all the presentations that we've forgotten that bonds are not just free money to the district from the voters, but I want to read you a quick quote from BizFluent that explains that bonds aren't free. Issuing bonds is basically the same as spending public money, since the school district has to eventually pay the money back. As a result, school districts can't just issue bonds whenever they want. They have to win approval from local voters, partly by proving that funds are needed. Once voters approve a bond measure, the school district begins selling bonds on the open market. Since school districts pay back the initial investment with interest, investors can earn profit when the district pays them back. So this quote explains 2 parts. 1, the district has to pay back the funds with interest. And 2, you need to win approval by proving to the voters that the funds are necessary. So how are we going to do that? Peoria isn't listening to any group of voters. Rather, they're coasting in neutral in hopes that everyone will just give up and go away. Using this bond money to revamp elementary and high school bathrooms is a waste of money, a waste of specifically $19.5 million, according to the presentation. Why spend $19.5 million when the board won't even create a policy for the bathrooms? And yet another $19.2 million was presented to be used for elementary and high school security and safety. I'm all for increasing the safety and security of the most valuable people in our lives, our children, but why borrow an additional $19.2 million plus interest when Peoria could get creative and apply for grants? It feels lazy to just ask the taxpayers for more money rather than put forth some effort first and exhaust all other options through grants. A bond will cost the district money, time, and resources to campaign. The voters have historically spoken and voted against a bond, so my family and I do not support this bond.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Next public comment comes from Teddy Todd.
Superintendent Dr. Reynolds, President David Sandoval, and Clerk Heather Rooks, and board members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to all. Does Peoria schools need additional money to adequately teach children? Yes. Do we need a bond for schools? Yes. Do we need it now? Yesterday? Yes. We are a frugal, professional, working community of great people. We are at a turning point in this school district, country, county, and state. How are we going to assure the education of our future leaders? We have enormous residential and future business manufacturing growth in this school district and in Maricopa County. Northern classrooms are overflowing with students. Additional classrooms are needed to correct the overcrowding. We still have not balanced payroll for new teachers with our experienced teachers. This inequity is causing harm in staff morale. We continue to lose teachers to other districts. Why are we spending money hiring social workers instead of teachers and additional high school guidance counselors as well as guidance counselors at 7th and 8th grade? We are not mental health clinics. We are public schools to teach students strong basics, to know how to research for answers, data, and truth, to be able to speak, to ask critical questions, to find joy in seeking knowledge. Social emotional learning, SEL, is not a curriculum. Those are just 2 more ways and methods that children learn among at least 5 others: the visual, the auditory, the read and write, and the movement. We cannot even establish a written bathroom policy for our student handbook. We have decades-old teaching materials, but we have the opportunity to approve new math and science materials now. I understand the replacement of our very old history, civics, social studies materials are part of this fall's school improvement plans. We have underutilized school buildings in the south, and in the north, overcrowded classrooms and not enough classrooms. Where is the plan to sell or rent school district property to bring in added funds to build classrooms and parking lots where needed? Who is our financial planner? We have a treasurer who does a fantastic job at keeping tabs on how much and where the dollars go. Are we thinking out of the box, applying for the many grants that are available? But is November 7th, 2023, the best time to place a bond on the ballot? I understand it costs about twice as much to ballot in 2023 as it would in 2024. With new student learning materials, technology, and additional professional development for the new materials, student math and science achievement should improve. The lack of proven student improvement over time is a huge stumbling block for a yes vote, as well as the decreased total enrollment numbers. These are unusual times. Our economy is in turmoil.
Ms. Todd, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank
Time's
you.
up. You're welcome. All right, final public comment tied to this line item. It comes from Micah Dyer.
Hello, Governing Board and guests. I stand before you today as a student of this district, and I stand in support of that you vote yes on the resolution that would authorize a bond election and provide the very much needed funding our district requires. As a concerned student, I'm deeply invested in the future of our education in this district. I implore each board member to pass this resolution and in turn extend your unwavering support for the bond and override on the upcoming ballot in November. This is what's important to the district, and this is what's important to students. We're not worried about bathrooms, and we're not worried about being indoctrinated. We're worried about passing this bond and override. It's no secret that our district has faced considerable funding challenges throughout the years. However, I'm encouraged by the recent recommendations put forward by the 2023 Citizens Bond Advisory Committee. Their proposal for a $250 million bond presents a golden opportunity for our community to rally together and invest in the educational foundation upon which our future success rests. By passing this resolution, your board members will be taking a momentous step toward ensuring the passage of the bond and override, and this action would demonstrate your commitment to the well-being and academic growth of each student in the PUSD district. I implore you to recognize the profound impact that this decision is going to have. The pressing needs for increased funding cannot be overstated. Our student population is expanding. Our current infrastructure struggles to accommodate this growth. We have overcrowded classrooms and strained resources that are hindering our ability to learn. And by passing this resolution, we can tackle these challenges. The bond and override funds will enable us to construct new schools and alleviate the burden of overcrowding. With these funds, we can create modern, well-equipped classrooms that foster collaboration, inspire creativity, empower us, and to reach our full potential. And it's important to invest in our education, our well-being, and our collective future. By passing this resolution, we'll send a resounding message of support to our teachers, the exceptional educators that are the backbone of our educational system. By investing in this education, we'll attract and retain top-tier teachers, which is crucial, especially in the state of Arizona, ensuring that every student receives a high-quality education that equips them for success in the ever-evolving world that we're living in. In November, we have the opportunity to stand together as a community and make a lasting impact by supporting this bond and override on the ballot. We can empower our district and to empower these much-needed advancements and overcome the financial hurdles that are impeding our progress. And in conclusion, I humbly request that each of you on the governing board pass the resolution before you at the next meeting now. And again, I just want to state, this is what students are worried about. We see the overcrowding. We see the lack of funding. I go to school every single day with all these wonderful teachers sitting over here. This is what we're worried about, and we need to pass. We need more funding. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Ms. Myers, welcome back. Board members, questions, comments? Ms. Hill.
Well, thank you again for putting together the information for us to review. As I have previously stated, I can't be in support of a bond for a district that doesn't support every single student. The girls are being reduced to second-class citizens. And I do agree with some of the comments that were made from some of the people in the room with regard to our standardized testing is not good. It's just not good. And it's in the 40 percentile range. That's deplorable to me. And to pour more money into a system that's broken is crazy. I do not support the bond.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen.
I spoke about this last time, and it's going to come back around again, so I'll speak again, and I will sit this one out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sorensen. Mrs. Rooks.
Hi, Ms. Myers. I know I kind of already asked this the previous one, but just for future references, so this coming November, putting the bond on the ballot, how much are you estimating, or do you guys have an amount already in place of how much it will be?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, members of the governing board, I shared on May 11th that when there's an election that's either a midterm or presidential, it's less expensive because there are multiple questions and shared costs with the ballot. Point of reference that in the past when we have been off cycle, it can be around $300,000.
Okay, and what, I guess for that piece, and I guess you can talk in the past previous elections, how much has it usually been to campaign to the community for the bond? And is there any plans for the future of, if this passes, like what campaign, I guess, would it be for?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, members of the governing board, the district actually is not permitted to campaign for the bond. Once the governing board calls for an election, there are statutes that restrict what district employees in the district can do related to a bond election. We do have the district's bond counsel, Mr. Gales, as well, if you would like to add to that. Thank you.
And also the safety and security on there, I've mentioned this a couple times because I've heard from other employees in the district that there are grants out there. I've brought up Title 4A. That grant provides safety and security for school districts. It has everything from cameras to locked doors, security gates, everything. And so I'm just having a really hard time that if we are putting the safety in the bond, why have we not tried to go out for grants?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, members of the governing board, I shared at the May 11th meeting that we do look at grant opportunities, including SFB renewal grants and other eligible grant funding sources. You'll also see when we propose our budget, second meeting in June, we're going to be prioritizing capital funding for safety initiatives as well. That's part of our annual funding allocation to include security cameras, vape sensors, and front office renovations for our elementary schools. So yes, we do look at where grant funding is available, but I can share building a new school, comprehensive renovations, building a new building at a high school, a land purchase for a future high school. Those types of projects, that dollar amount, there aren't grants that are in place to cover all of those needs. And so when we presented to our Citizens Advisory Committee projects, priority and essential, renovations, updates, elementary schools, high schools, district-wide, all of those may have grant eligibility, and we do track that, Mr. Molino and his team as well. But again, when you have a comprehensive program, oftentimes there aren't enough grants that are available to support all of those identified needs and priorities.
Okay. And with the bond going on the ballot, I know you mentioned in the past it's more expensive in the off-election years. With that funding that we need to put on the ballot, where does that come from? Is it M&O, I'm guessing? So just kind of breaking that down.
Thank you. President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, members of the governing board, that is an M&O eligible cost, but we could also use a non-M&O funding source that would also be eligible. It is not required to be paid for from M&O.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the questions and the answers, but for me, Mrs. Hill made it very clear. How can we ask the taxpayers, the parents, to fund this right now with everything that has been going on the past couple of years? I just think that we're not really listening to what they're trying to tell us. And again, I can't support something that doesn't support the concerns of parents and their daughters and their sons with the whole bathroom issue. But I also know that there are a lot of senior citizens, families struggling right now for groceries, gas, with our economy. And I think that raising it right now is a really bad idea. Just for purposes, this is what is going on right now. Families can't afford groceries, gas, putting food on the table for their children and their families because of inflation right now. And we're going to ask them to do more. I can't support that. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Rooks. Mrs. Ewing, questions, comments?
Okay, couple quick comments. On Title 4A, I thought, it was my understanding that was dependent upon some demographics and crime. So we have a crime in that area, so we have several schools that wouldn't be eligible. Maybe it's based on Title I as well.
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, members of the governing board, I would recommend that you request perhaps a detailed update on that federal funding source in a Friday report or future board meeting because of our agenda being tied to the resolution and approving for discussion purposes. Thank you.
Sure. So thank you. So quick question for you. I know at the end of the last meeting, you mentioned that we have some funds that are coming into the district based upon the approved legislative budget that could be put forth to some of the bond authorization projects. You mentioned safety. I'm looking back here at some information. You said that we have an additional increase to the M&O, a one-time funding, 9.5 million and so forth. So I know that this is information that the Citizens Advisory didn't have at that time because it's brand new information. We didn't have it at the last meeting. So, and it's my understanding that there's pieces of this that could help to cover some of the things that were mentioned in the bond. So I just was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sandoval, Mrs. Ewing, members of the governing board. I did provide in the Friday report an update related to the final fiscal year 2024 budget that was approved by the legislature and signed by the governor. And yes, there is some one-time funding that's either M&O or capital eligible, 9.5 million, 9%, slightly over 9% increase for district additional assistance capital, which is a couple of $1 million. So administration with our proposed budget, we're going to look at from some of those projects that were identified as being bond eligible, what also could we include on top of what we were already planning for? Security is the primary focus, as well as other areas. I work closely with Mr. Molino and his team, the facilities group. So we'll be providing the governing board with an update on some of those recommended priorities in the near future.
So is there a possibility that if that if we had had that information, that it would have changed some of the things that we would have gone out for on this bond?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Ewing, members of the governing board, I don't believe it would have changed the committee's recommendation, but there is the potential it might have adjusted the authorization amount slightly downward. But a number of the priorities that were discussed, and again, it was a 10-0 recommendation from the committee, those are ongoing needs that have been in place for some time that truly would be supported with the bond authorization.
Yeah. So I understand that, all of those needs are very critical and they're needed, and the priority level of those projects would still remain the same. But with that money coming in, if we had known, there could have been things that we could say, oh, well, we'll cover this and that, and so it wouldn't be needed to be go out for the bond. Is that?
It wouldn't, thank you, President Sandoval and Mrs. Ewing, members of the board. It would not have replaced a bond authorization. It may have brought it down slightly, $9 million, $10 million. Also provides the district additional capital funding to continue on without a bond authorization if that was delayed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ewing. Thank you, board members. Yeah, I think for me, Dr. Sorensen, I had a lot of comments at the last board meeting around this subject, but I'll just briefly paraphrase and summarize. It's ever since I was elected in 2016, we've needed a bond then. We're 140 years old as a district, or upwards of 140 years, and we have a lot of aging schools in the the downtown area of the city of Peoria and Glendale, and we have sites that are just busting at the seams and large classroom sizes, which you talk to teachers and students. It's that is a factor, right? That I think certainly keeps our teachers from being able to create those working connections with their students and being able to see beyond what's right in front of them, right? In an effort to meet our students, where they're at. And we have communities that are continuing to be developed and here in the city of Peoria and then the northwest sector, of our district. And when you talk about, overcrowding and school sites and classrooms that are large, and we're talking about safety, that is another safety factor, right, that we need to consider where building, additional schools would certainly make a difference with, if you will. Look, I've always said we, as a district, I think it's an honor, one, to serve on this board, but it is also inspiring when you see the number of individuals that want to come to Peoria Unified, because of our high caliber teachers and our rigorous curriculum, and because of the fact that, we are very intentional about, serving our students in a way that they deserve, and again, meet them where they're at. From the wraparound services and our McKinney-Vento students and foster students and students with special needs, I can go on, but we just, we're rich in programs, and we give all students the opportunity to really do some great things. So I know I'm kind of going off a little bit on the subject, but I think for me, and I said it last time, right now, what I don't have a handle on is, and I know this isn't a factor of the district, because the district, once they say, yes, we're going, it is another entity that kind of takes it and runs with it. But we do have a very diverse community from, our communities that, are at our different life stage that don't have children in their homes. Some of those homes, we do have grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. We have our young adults as well, our young families. everybody engages with the district in a different way. And, as we've gone out in the past, I think we've used the same mold and strategy and tactic where, if we spent time truly building and growing the relationships between the school district and some of our communities. So from an education and awareness perspective, that they fully understand the impact on them if we do have a thriving school district. In this case, schools to be able to address the growth in our district. And from a safety perspective, making sure that our students, and as they walk on to campus, they walk on in a very a feeling of being safe and supported. So all that said, that's kind of what I said last time. And, I do appreciate you taking the time of giving us really briefing on the bond. But I know, unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, we'll have to move any action tied to this line item to a future governing board meeting. But thank you for the details again. Appreciate it. Thanks.
President Sandoval, I just wanted to make one comment. I don't believe that we are thriving right now, especially with our last board meeting with a little girl crying in our boardroom of allowing boys in the bathroom. So I disagree with the part of thriving when we're ignoring those kind of situations.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Rooks.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 9.2, Math, Science Curriculum, and Textbook Adoption RFP Award. I'll pause for a second. Ms. Myers, you're part of this discussion as well, right?
Thank you, President Sandoval.
Are you kicking us off?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Thank
Gotcha.
you.
All right.
Yes, so good evening again, President Sandoval, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Reynolds, and community. Thank you for the opportunity to present award information regarding the district's RFP for math and science curriculum, textbooks, and a district-wide adoption. Tonight, Dr. Hernandez and I will both present information related to the district issuing an RFP, request for proposal, to procure math and science curriculum and textbooks. We will highlight the district's approach, funding source, and timeline for governing board approval. At the October 27th, 2022 governing board meeting, administration shared that district science resources were in need of updating for K-12 student instruction. And at that meeting, Dr. Hernandez spoke to those resources and the needs identified on this slide. At that same meeting, we also shared that we had a similar case for math, print and digital resources, K-12, throughout the district to support student instruction. Rule R7-2, 1002C7 exempts textbooks from procurement in Arizona. They are exempt from Arizona School District procurement rules if textbooks are purchased from the publisher, and we shared this in October. However, with this exemption, a district still may go forward with a formal procurement process. So even though there is the exemption, it does not preclude a district from doing a formal RFP. The governing board can determine whether and to what extent to involve a textbook selection committee in the governing board's textbook procurement. The governing board can also consider recommendations of a textbook selection committee, but it is not bound by them and cannot delegate its authority to make textbook selections or procurements to that type of a committee. There are also statutory and policy-related requirements for textbook selection and procurement in Arizona when using, and this is a keyword, non-federal funds. Arizona Revised Statute 721 and 15722 vests authority in the governing board to select and acquire textbooks for elementary and high school locations in a district. Textbook selections are also covered by district policy IJJ, which allows for but does not require the superintendent to appoint a textbook selection committee to be part of this process. Under district policy, if a textbook selection committee is appointed, the committee then forwards their recommendation to the superintendent for consideration. And it also requires that those textbook selection committee meetings be in public. Now, I'm spending a couple of minutes highlighting the background because we have Arizona procurement rules, state law, as well as district policy in this arena. And then we bring in federal funds. The district is planning to use ESSER 3 COVID relief dollars from the federal government for a textbook adoption. It's an eligible expense. The use of the federal funds invokes the application of several federal requirements related to governing board expenditures in this arena, and it also requires a formal procurement related to expenditures of those federal funds. This requirement consequently restricts the district from relying on Arizona revised statutes and procurement exemptions when moving forward with the textbook curriculum adoption, and will require and does require a district to have a formal RFP. So you've heard this before, but because it's been a number of months, I wanted to highlight these considerations and nuances. Administration was aware of this, and back at the beginning of the fiscal year, we began working with our legal counsel to identify an appropriate process where we could address the federal, state, and policy-related requirements for a textbook adoption here in Peoria Unified. And so with that back, on October 27th, administration previously shared with the governing board that there was a recommendation that the district move forward with a science and math textbook and curriculum adoption, in part due to the age of current materials, as well as the availability of the ESSER funding, which also ESSER 3 is sunsetting this next fiscal year. All of those funds have to be expended on or before September 30th, 2024, and so we're tracking a June 30th completion date for ESSER 3. And the reason, again, why I highlight that is they are eligible for a textbook adoption. At that meeting with the recommendation, the governing board did take action. It was a 5-0 vote authorizing the district to issue a request for proposal for science and math textbooks, a curriculum adoption with the process and the timeline and the criteria that was presented at that meeting on October 27th. So at that point, we had a comprehensive presentation and looked at all of the requirements that I just briefly highlighted and additional information, including that the RFP that the district was planning to release would have 5 main evaluation criteria, including cost, as well as textbook content, including alignment to state standards, a method of approach, criteria, professional development, and vendor responsiveness. The joining of federal, state, and district policy requirements resulted in a recommendation for 2 committees supporting the RFP process. The RFP Evaluation Committee would be the classic evaluation committee that we use for all of our RFPs and formal solicitations, and that group would be looking specifically at content alignment, which would include state standards. There would also be an evaluation of vendor responsiveness, professional development, and cost. So those 2 committees would be working hand in hand. The RFP Evaluation Committee, and you'll see that's detailed on this slide, coupled with a textbook advisory committee, which would publicly, in public, review the method of approach evaluation criteria for the RFP in the content areas of math and science, and how they meet the needs of the students here in our district, our general and special populations. So at that October 27th meeting, we shared this information, and that parents, community, and students would have a voice in the process. There would be a 60-day public evaluation period, and Dr. Hernandez is going to provide very detailed information on that process and the work that our textbook advisory committee did in just a few slides later in the presentation. So as a reminder, on October 27th, we provided a proposed RFP timeline. And I can share that that is the timeline we adhered to through this process. In addition, we presented an at-a-glance flow chart really detailing the work from beginning to end after the RFP was issued and the solicitation had been responded to, the work that the RFP Evaluation Committee would do in conjunction with the Textbook Advisory Committee. So you've seen this information before. We also shared that the RFP Evaluation Committee followed Arizona School District procurement requirements. They were subject to state statutory requirements and related authoritative guidelines, including confidentiality, throughout the entire process. The committee's scoring work was a basis for the final recommendation that will be brought forward for award by the governing board at a future board meeting. Tonight, again, is information only. So with that, I will contrast that our Textbook Advisory Committee was a public entity, meeting in public with a focus on one evaluation criteria and method of approach. And again, this work will be detailed by Dr. Hernandez. The RFP Evaluation Committee began meeting in December, and they concluded their meetings in May, on May 8th, 2023. The RFP Evaluation Committee was comprised of 14 qualified district employees with varied positions and extensive experience in education. Some of those demographics are listed on the slide. I will note with our 6 administrators, we had team members who had math experience, who also had been instructional coaches, had worked as principals of virtual and physical schools, as well as expertise in their content areas. So Dr. Hernandez can speak to this group in more detail than I can, as well as our Textbook Advisory Committee members. And so with that, here on the slide are the team members who were part of the committee, who were part of the process over the last several months. And I'd also like to publicly thank each committee member for the work they did with the district's purchasing department and the time they spent during this process. Speaking of our purchasing department and business services team, I'd also like to publicly thank Anna Romero, our senior buyer, who worked very closely with me through this entire process, as well as our entire business services team and purchasing department. And if we have any of our RFP Evaluation Committee members in the room, we'd like to publicly thank them. I think we might have a couple. We have TAC members. I know you'll be recognized as well. Okay, and with that, the criteria, again, with this flow chart, you'll see the 4 main areas that the RFP committee evaluated. They did score method of approach, but that was with input from our Textbook Advisory Committee. And again, the 2 first criteria, responsiveness, that simply means that the firm, the vendor responding to our RFP responded in a complete way. All required documentation, legal requirements, forms, and requests as part of that RFP for information were turned in on time, and that all of the required documents were properly signed and submitted. And then I'll just note with cost, while cost is a significant factor when considering the placement of awards with the formal solicitation, it is not the only factor. The recommended award will not be based on price alone, nor it will be based solely upon the lowest fees submitted. However, cost is an important consideration when using federal funds. It has to be a primary factor and the most heavily weighted of the evaluation criteria. But again, there were 5 criteria that were considered. And now with that, I will ask Dr. Hernandez to join me, and she's going to review the other evaluation criteria and the work of the Textbook Advisory Committee. Dr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Dr. Hernandez, welcome.
Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the board, Superintendent Reynolds, cabinet, and guests. As Ms. Myers, make sure I got the right slide here. Mentioned, there were 3 areas of alignment that were evaluated on the RFP side. The first was the course alignment. Up against the Peoria Unified Course descriptions, textbooks were verified to ensure that they met all of the criteria in our course descriptions. Second, they had to be aligned to Arizona state standards. Each vendor's resources were evaluated to identify if all of the required state standards were addressed, as well as ensuring there was depth to how those standards were addressed within the content. The group that finished the quickest on their standards alignment took 35 hours. The group that went the longest exceeded 50 hours on the standards alignment component. The third area was the ancillary materials. Those materials were evaluated to determine breadth and depth in how we support learning for all of our students. Examples include science kits, math manipulatives, workbooks, and items of that nature. For K-8 elementary, science and math, all grade levels, kindergarten through 8th grade, were evaluated. For high school science courses, the courses included for consideration were biology, chemistry, physics, conceptual physics, earth space science, and environmental science. Noting that vendors had the opportunities to submit proposals for texts separate for our honors courses. I'd also like to note that the final recommendation for board consideration does not include additional text for honors. As honors is about the complexity of thinking rather than additional materials, we determined that the titles selected covered both the needs of the honors courses and the regular courses. For our high school math courses included for consideration were Algebra, Geometry, and Algebra 2, also known as AGA. Our 4th credit math courses included College Algebra, which can be taken as honors and dual enrollment, College Mathematics, which is offered as dual enrollment and not honors, Financial Algebra, which is not honors but offered as dual enrollment, Statistics, which heading into the next school year, we are excited to provide a regular statistics course in addition to our AP Stats course. Pre-calculus is honors only, and brief calculus is honors only. Similarly to high school, courses with an honors option were recommended, that were offered to have a recommended text. We'll only utilize one text for honors and for regular. The next evaluation criteria was around professional development. As a requirement, first-year professional development must be included at no cost to the district. Professional development was evaluated through 2 lenses. The first was methods of delivery, and the second was the content of the professional development to support our student learners in these areas: enrichment, intervention, and scaffolds. Proposals were evaluated based on provisions of a variety of options. We wanted to include that we had face-to-face options, online options, recorded tutorials, and other opportunities that would allow referencing those later on. All training and support documents must be available in electronic format as well. Professional development must be sustainable and will meet district needs for multiple years. We wanted trainer of trainer options to build in-house expertise, and we wanted specific training for our administrators in order to support them in how they support their staff. The learning opportunities within the professional development needed to focus around how teachers are able to access their data in order to monitor and adjust instruction based on specific student need. Scaffolding activities and supports were also evaluated, such pieces as simple as I do, we do, you do, in supporting students in gaining mastery of content, in addition to being able to support classrooms' whole instruction, small and group instruction as needed, and even at the individual level if needed for each individual student. Tiered instruction was also a major focus of our work with this adoption. Tiered instruction offers the opportunity to support all students where they are with what they need as the instruction is being delivered. And finally, we wanted explicit supports for special populations within the training our teachers would receive, and Lexile levels for text that needed to be provided to support a range of readability within a grade level. And with the final evaluation of the standards, course alignment, and PD complete, the process transitioned to the Textbook Advisory Committee. So now we'll move into the blue boxes. The Textbook Advisory Committee's primary responsibility and only responsibility is to evaluate method of approach. Evaluating each vendor holistically determine how well the resources proposed meet the needs of both the general student population and our special populations. Unlike some other areas of evaluation, method of approach is reflective of a vendor's holisticness so far as how it approaches student learning for all learners. All Textbook Advisory Committee meetings were open to the public. So for all of our 20 textbook advisory committee meetings, agendas were posted 24 hours before, minutes were kept and posted on board docs, microphones were used to ensure all members could hear the deliberations and the proceedings. All minutes included accurate depictions of actions along with how each member voted. To ensure continued diligence to open meeting law, the previous slide and this slide were included and shared at all 20 meetings to ensure compliance. And as we transition into the actual work of the Textbook Advisory Committee, here are their core responsibilities. Consider all student populations, host vendor presentations, review all submitted public feedback collected during the 60-day window. The Textbook Advisory Committee was comprised of a cross-section of groups with over half of our schools represented. The Textbook Advisory Committee is made up of 5 content coaches, 6 instructional coaches with 1 representing exceptional student services, 40 teachers made of 25 science teachers and 15 math teachers, 4 administrators representing 3 of our schools and 1 from the district, with 25 schools represented and 1,060 total years of experience represented across the Textbook Advisory Committee. That's a lot, you guys. Before sharing the names of those who served for each of the areas we'll talk about, I want to publicly thank each of them for sharing their expertise, their talent, and their experiences to put student learners first in all of our discussions and all of our evaluations. For those who are not able to join us this evening, we thank you. And for those who are able to join us, I thank you for your service. So we'll begin first with our K-8 science team. There were 18 members. Here are the dates in which this team met, noting that the last meeting of each of our 4 areas, so when I say 4 areas, I'm referring to K-8 math, K-8 science, high school math, high school science, but noting the last meeting of the day had 2 meetings. As double sure, we had hosted a second public meeting to approve the minutes of the other meeting. So that's why there will be 2 on that day. And here are our K-8 math members with 19 of them and the meeting dates for which they served. Our high school members, all 12 of them for high school science, and the dates in which they met. And then finally, our high school math members with 11 of them and the dates in which they met. And you'll notice that there are 5 days, and we did go pretty close to 8 hours each day. And in the first 2 days, we only allowed them to have a 30-minute lunch and told them to bring it and warm it up in the microwave because we had work to do. I know. So it was about 40 hours of work across those 5 days for our Textbook Advisory Committee members. Per state policy and, district policy and statute, the textbooks were placed on the 60-day display beginning January 9th, 2023 in the lobby of the District Administration Center, and they were there through April 12th, 2023. Additional displays, in order to support public access to those displays to encourage more feedback, were available during the week of January 16th. We had 2 additional elementary locations at Zuni Hills Elementary and Alta Loma Elementary, with 2 additional high school locations at Peoria High School and Sunrise Mountain High School. We'd like to thank those 4 additional sites for inconveniencing them and taking up space in their schools with all of these materials for that long stretch of time. So thank you to those schools, their staff, and their administration for supporting us. In addition, we had a dedicated website that included a list of the resources, information on how to provide feedback and be involved, as well as what would include the pre-recorded presentations from the presentation section of the TAC review. Our colleagues in the PR department supported us by sending broad communications to support awareness and encourage participation and feedback. And the Textbook Advisory Committee's method of approach has 3 cycles, and I'll be taking you through each of those cycles. The first, in the blue box, is consistent with 5 areas of method of approach. The second, in the light green box, is about the criteria that was evaluated during the presentation stage. And in the final box, we'll be talking about the first 2 cycles as well as inclusion of the public's feedback. For 2 full days, the Textbook Advisory Committee evaluated these 5 categories of method of approach: ease of use, best practices, instructional technology, meeting the needs of all students, and assessment. But before we unpack all 5 of those areas, as a reminder, in the fall, we collected student feedback through the SEATs, which is students engaging with administrators and teachers, and asked our students, what resources do you want to have in your hands, and what resources do you want your teachers to have? And that feedback was included throughout this evaluation cycle. And as I give a couple of examples from each of our areas, I'll highlight a few that were directly from our students. So the first category is ease of use. And this, as it sounds, it's how easy is it for students and teachers to navigate both the print and the digital components of each resource. How engaging are the math manipulatives or the science kits for the students? And are the kits comprehensive so that teachers aren't having to go and fill this or fill that? Do they all come comprehensively prepared? The second area highlighted best practices. Best practices sinks into rigor of standards and meeting the 2018 expectations. Do the materials support higher level thinking opportunities? One of our student voice categories was that students wanted to see a wide variety of opportunity to engage not only with the content, but with each other in their classrooms in that collaborative space. That criteria was evaluated within best practices. And then finally, another example is to prepare for the rigorous expectations of ACT. Within our best practices, we want to ensure that our resources are providing teachers and students the opportunity to have access to information that is of that rigorous level, as well as, we'll talk assessment here in just a minute, but also those types of items. Whoops, I keep advancing it and I'm not supposed to be yet. There we go. Instructional technology. Specific to instructional technology, the committee evaluated how well the technology was embedded within the resources so that the technology didn't create a distraction from the learning, but rather complemented the learning. Student voice showed us that they wanted to have authentic use of technology to support active collaboration, to support real-life authentic activities. And of course, accessibility tools are important as well. Are there cues? Are there supports for students? Can they hover over and a word can show the definition? Are there opportunities for them to be able to listen to a text, speed it up, slow it down? Those are important components of our instructional technology. I did it again, didn't I? Oh. And then meeting the needs of all learners. We want to make sure that the resources have opportunities to scaffold learning. Again, that I do, we do, you do, so that there are depth in the resources for teachers to be able to stay within the adopted resource to find what they need comprehensively. We wanted to make sure there were supports for a variety of approaches to learning, and this was another student voice component. Students said that they wanted to make sure all of their peers had access to the content at an entry point that was just right for them. All learners need to be able to access the content completely, whether that be access to the digital or access to the print. And of course, those visual tools are also very important. And finally, assessment. Assessments needed to be designed and geared to help teachers plan based on student needs. We wanted to make sure they would measure grade level and conceptual understanding. And of course, test items needed to be reflected of state level expectations such as AZSI and ACT. Across those evaluations, the committee submitted 108 reviews for K-8 science, 114 for K-8 math, 85 for high school science, and 79 for high school math. Here is a sample of what that rubric looked like that the committee went through for. There were about 10 items for each of those 5 categories, and they were to assess holistically the particular vendor, here's an example for teacher tools for ACT, as to the quality of evidence that supported the method of approach. And that concludes cycle 1 of the Textbook Advisory Committee review. As we prepare for cycle 2, the committee was prepared to host presentations from the vendors that would highlight method of approach. The first element was ESSA level of evidence, and then we proceeded into 5 other areas that the vendors were asked to speak about through the lens of method of approach: content knowledge, instructional background, pacing and planning, tiered instruction, teacher support, and learner support. So we'll begin with the ESSA level of evidence. As part of our ESSER requirement, to use the 20% set aside for math, each vendor needed to provide an ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, level of evidence. The level of evidence demonstrates that those particular resources have research behind them that shows effectiveness in closing learning gaps. And so that was for math only, and each vendor had to provide that information to the committee. The first area that all vendors were to respond to was around expectations for background and instructional skill. We wanted to be certain that if we chose resources, that there weren't any unexpected knowledge or experience or skills that teachers were to have prior to onboarding a resource, because that would require us to provide additional professional development opportunities in front of bringing on the new resources. So it was important that vendors spoke to that particular piece. The second piece is around logistics of time. Relative to pacing and planning, state any scheduling expectations, such as minutes per day, for implementation of the proposed resources needed to cover all content. Keep in mind the scope of Arizona state standards, and a reminder that Peoria high schools are on the block schedule. The block schedule means twice the amount of content is covered per semester, so the materials must be laid out in a manner that supports block schedules. So that was one of the pieces that we evaluated. Additional elementary schools, master scheduling varies, so having an awareness of the time requirement per day to cover a typical science or math lesson was very important in making a decision. And then, of course, they must reflect support for all teachers across the range between being new and being a veteran teacher. Third, we focused on support for educators. You'll notice here how to propose resources support teachers to address the needs of not only all learners, but our special population of learners. The resources need to have opportunities to guide the teacher to a variety of lessons for each standard to support all learners in the way those learners need to be supported. The fourth area was around a variety of instruction. So this is where we talk about differentiation and supporting tiered instruction. Tier 1 being a universal instructional approach for all students. Tier 2 is a strategic and targeted maybe at a skill or a concept level, and not all students are going to need Tier 2 instruction. And Tier 3 in the same fashion is more of an intense intervention for some students. Again, not all, not some, but just a few select. And we want to make sure that our resources are comprehensive, again, so that teachers are working within the adopted resource and not having to go outside to look for additional materials. For instructional technology, we looked for materials that would engage students, again, focusing to help them be motivated to learn and not distracting them from the intended learning. We want our students to utilize technology to become active learners, not passive learners where they're just absorbing information. We want technology to help enhance the learning, provide scaffolded supports for learners to access and make understanding easier. And of course, extension is also very important in that the traditional school day, we need a bridge between what happens in the classroom and what happens at home in the evening when they're working on homework and practicing those skills. And technology is a great opportunity for that. And finally, the fifth area is a focus on learners. So this is where we talked about our teacher support, and now what are the supports directly for learners. We talked about active learners. Is there a glossary the students can access to help them develop vocabulary outside of the classroom? Do they have the opportunity to look at that text and hover over, read, speed up, slow it down? And then most importantly, are the tools and supports not distracting from the learning? Are they keeping focus and making it meaningful for the learners? At the conclusion of cycle 2, because we're on 2 of 3, which includes the 5 categories plus the presentations, the committee drafted an initial perception of the vendor's method of approach, which highlighted strengths and weaknesses. The initial perception are in the respective minutes from when the team originally drafted them. At the close of the 60-day review, the third cycle began. When we brought the teams back together for their third cycle review, the first thing they did was to review the 2 cycles and their initial perception that had been drafted from this first set of meetings. Then they reviewed all of the public feedback. In combination with the 2 cycles, feedback from the public was added to the initial perception. Public feedback included representatives of parents, staff, students, and our community members, and so lots of voices to contribute to that public feedback. The feedback was collected through traditional paper and pencil options. We had QR codes that you could scan by each display, and it would take you to a form survey to be able to provide feedback from your respective perspective. There was a textbook adoption-specific email address that many used to send us direct thoughts. All pre-recorded presentations were available online on the district's website on our adoption page, so people were able to go review those presentations, provide more and additional feedback if they chose to. We had a digital platform to access accompanying physical and print resources. Some even used the note catcher tools that we used with the Textbook Advisory Committee meetings because they were publicly posted. And then, of course, we also accepted handwritten notes. So we had quite the variety of public feedback to work through in our final perception. Science had over 246 submissions from staff, parents, students, and community member feedback. Math had over 300. So that is a significant body of feedback that our 4 groups worked through to really understand public feedback. So the evaluation method included identifying the strengths and weaknesses from that public feedback. They considered the alignment to their initial perception of strengths and weaknesses. They added summary of the feedback to their initial perception, and the final overall perception was created to reflect all 3 cycles of review. And here we are. We are now closing in on the end of that last blue box. The completion of the textbook advisory's work. At the conclusion of the 4 areas, the overall perception of method of approach and the recommendations were turned over to the RFP team. The final recommendation was included in the final meeting's minutes. A roll call vote was taken to approve the final overall perception, and as I mentioned earlier, the public meeting held to approve minutes of the meeting in which the final overall perception of method of approach was approved by roll call vote. So a very thorough process. And that is the completion of the Textbook Advisory Committee's work, and I will now hand the presentation back to Ms. Myers.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Ms. Myers, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Once the RFP Evaluation Committee received the report from the Textbook Advisory Committee, they began to finalize their work. The RFP Evaluation Committee took the report from the Textbook Advisory Committee and used that as a basis for their scoring. In addition, vendors were invited to submit best and final offers as part of the procurement. And this included vendor presentations for K-8 science, as well as clarification on questions that the RFP Evaluation Committee had, and the opportunity for the vendors to update or sharpen their pricing. Once the RFP Evaluation Committee completed their work, the district's purchasing department compiled the submitted scores from the RFP Evaluation Committee and the finalized submitted vendor costs for evaluation. And so with all of that work coming together with the 5 evaluation criteria, a total of 950 points by area, you'll notice there were 4 areas that we made an award in. Savvis Learning is highlighted as having the highest score, ranked number 1 for all 4 areas. The vendor award recommendation also included statistics, financial algebra, and college algebra. And the district is recommending an award to Bedford, Freeman, and Worth, as well as Cengage Learning, respectively, for these textbooks only. No purchase for college math or brief calculus will be made as part of this RFP award. In addition, no purchase is being made to use a different or separate text for honors courses. The contract will be effective upon award by the governing board at a future board meeting and will continue until a new adoption is approved under Arizona Revised Statute 15721 and Arizona Revised Statute 15722. The district does anticipate, based on the cost analysis as part of this RFP evaluation and award, that The cost is $11.3 million, again, from ESSER funds. That dollar amount does not include ancillary costs for purchases associated with the textbooks that are listed that we have added to this agenda item. So you can see by area, K-8 math, K-8 science, high school math, high school science, the actual texts that are being recommended as part of this award. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Both Dr. Hernandez and I are available to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers, and thank you, Dr. Hernandez. We do have public comment tied to this line item, so we'll listen to that, and then we'll get into board questions and comments. All right, we have public comment tied to this specific line item. First public comment comes from Corrine Haynes.
Dr. Reynolds, President Sandoval, and Board. First of all, I was privileged to sit in with the teachers and the vendor presentations for the science and some of the math. I think Dr. Teresa Hernandez did an excellent job facilitating, and the teachers really took a deep dive discerning alliteration, the strengths and weaknesses of each vendor. They were really amazing how hard they work and the work they did. I watch Florida a lot. I like what I see they're doing in education and the problems they are facing and how they're dealing with it. And it's because I kind of follow Florida. I was just recently made aware that Florida has rejected the following textbooks because they either failed to meet their new education standards or contained references to what they call unsolicited strategies. And they listed those as social emotional learning, common core inclusions, critical race theory. The following vendors were on their rejected list: Big Ideas Learning, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, McGraw-Hill, Savas Learning, which was mentioned quite a bit of times, Accelerate Learning, Carnegie Learning, Cengage Learning, Bedford. And I was shocked. I thought, oh my gosh, those are most of the vendors that we were looking at. And I'm thinking, gosh, were there more we should have considered if these are Florida's rejects? However, if these are our choices, one stuck out to me or stood out to me, and it was high school biology. The others, not so much. I couldn't really say I preferred one over the other. But this particular one, I did really enjoy watching their presentation. And so some of the written responses, this parent had written, Dr. Hernandez, I'm a parent, PUSUD. I have been viewing the curriculum that is in review for adopting. I had viewed all the companies. I have found, in my opinion, that McGraw-Hill was the best company. McGraw-Hill, I found, had the best examples and graphs teaching science and biology. It was very easy to follow and had hands-on teaching, and she goes on. I'll go to, it's quite a lengthy, and compare some of the others, but she ends it with, I hope this company gets adopted. I learned more reading McGraw-Hill material than all the other companies. I kept wanting to reach out for more of their books and to read more. And I thought that's interesting because when I watched the vendor's presentation, McGraw-Hill just really caught me. I'm thinking, boy, I'd like to go back and learn science through this particular vendor. Did a good job.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. I appreciate your time.
Oh, is it
Yeah.
up? Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
All right, next public comment tied to this line item comes from Ms. Suzanne Yee. All right, moving on. Next public comment comes from Mr. Frank Eager. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. President, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds,
First off, I also want to say what a monumental effort the teachers did, including Dr. Hernandez, Ms. Myers. It was amazing what they did and how they did the deep dive. I don't know if I could have done that 30-minute lunch thing and bring it and freeze it, that's for sure. A couple things I just want to point out to you about the curriculum that's up here. I graduated, I've said many times before, from this district, from Cactus High School in 1991. The biology book is the same one still there. So I'm telling you that right there. So this is something that needs to be done with. We do need new material to teach our students. I know as an art teacher it's a little bit different, but I have created all my own curriculum, and there's nothing there for me out there to use, which is fine. I figured it out. I made it work. I've done it for a long time. But to help newer teachers who join the profession, or even some of our veteran teachers, help guide these students through the new material we have to do, especially the ACT testing. We did have growth, which I'm very proud of as a district, but we're still not meeting those needs of those students. And we need newer material to help meet those standards that are there for the ACT test, because it is a state requirement that all juniors take the test, and that's how we're rated as schools on that growth plan. So you can say if you don't like it or not, but we need the material to help us with this. And if we do not adopt new material, a lot of the programs we have are going to sunset. There will no longer be material for the teachers out there to have or get information from. We won't be able to use the online resources, the copies, because we no longer have the rights to those. So we really need to really think about what we're using. My wife teaches in a different district. I won't say the name, but they don't have a set curriculum that's laid out. And she struggles in her class every day trying to figure out how she teaches math, because there's no set guideline or pace for her to follow. And she's been teaching almost as long as I have, and that's a struggle for her. And she wishes there was more base material for her to pull from to help her students, not random videos made by overworked teachers that are out there. We need to have a good set curriculum. And I really hope in future board meetings this gets approved and we move forward with it, because I trust my colleagues, I trust the people who did this, the open law meetings that were there, and I think we should move forward with this when we have the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eager. Next public comment comes from Teddy Todd.
Hello again.
Welcome back.
Thank you. First, a huge thank you, Dr. Teresa Hernandez and staff, for the mega thought hours, energy, organizational skills expended for this year-long review of math and science K-12 teaching materials. Unreal. Really unreal. Also thanks to, and I did count all those peoples, 18 K-8 textbook advisory members for science, 19 K-8 they wrote, they watched, they listened, they evaluated, and they recommended for 8 different vendors. Also thanks to the 12 high school science TAC members and the 11 high school math TAC members. Absolutely amazing. The hours. I was there present in some of those, watching, listening. It was kind of quiet. They were working so hard, really good. It was very thorough, well organized. It met the education standards, evaluation processes, and the rules and policies and procedures of federal and state laws and funding requirements. It's amazing. Communication to aid for our families, communications, and parents were timely. Textbooks and accompanying resources were available for all district people to review. There were also established ways for we, the people, to communicate our evaluation results to the district. I'm encouraged that many persons communicated their textbook materials evaluations with the district. This district sought and received input from many. I'm disappointed that there weren't more vendor materials in the mix to review, but the district was limited by the vendors that responded. No way we could do anything different there. Also, some of the research was already out of date or proven inaccurate. That happens with textbooks. When theory is presented to students, there needs to be other theories also. Students need to learn to compare and contrast. Boy, did the committees compare and contrast. Oh my gosh. Find the pros and cons of an issue and the research behind the issue. What are the facts, who says so, and how? The numbering system worked for calculating vendor ratings. I would only question the high school science recommended vendor, Savas Learning over McGraw-Hill, as some materials predated the 2018 AZ science standards and the utilization of the 3D science instructional model. There was only a 13.43 total point difference. Might just think about that one again or not. There is no perfect math or science teaching system of materials. Just doesn't happen. This district staff worked very hard to create and implement the textbook review system. Thank you for these results for our students, our next leaders.
Thank you, Ms. Todd. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. All right, next public comment comes from Roderick Ripley. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. So my biggest concern with the material that's been selected and has been kind of mentioned is more of the biology section of the high school material. I think it kind of voids this curriculum, null and void, because it cannot define what a man and woman is. It talks about gender as it being fluid, and that is not the case. And if you're in science, you should know that. It's male or female across the board, not just in humans, but in plants, animals, everything. So I just ask that maybe we have a review of some other material, swap out for that, maybe at least that one book, something along those lines. Something I didn't get to mention earlier, because I was hoping to speak in the general section. I hope I'm not out of turn here. At Liberty High School, there was a child that was hit by a car crossing the street and died. And I'm hoping we can get something done with city. I spoke at city council about this, and I'm hoping that you guys can somehow work with them to try to implement some more safety street lights or something over there and help out with that.
Thank you.
Would
Mr.
appreciate
Ripley.
that.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Yep.
Thank you.
If you have further comments tied to this line item, you're more than welcome to speak. We just need to stay focused on the line item, though.
I understand. That was just kind of want to throw that in there, but that's all I have to say
Yep.
anyway.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Very much.
All right. Final public comment tied to this line item comes from Melissa Gurmshed. Welcome.
Good evening, President Sandoval, Dr. Reynolds, members of the board. I want to thank you for undertaking this. I taught at Centennial for 9 years, and we used to play a game. It was called Find Your Teachers and Your Parents in Your Textbook. Because you could open it up, and they were old enough that you would find where you wrote their name in it at the time, because we didn't have there was no OCR reader to check out the books, so the names are in there. It was a great game. We found many, many parents and teachers in those textbooks. So this is long, long overdue. And looking at who served on these committees, you have a veritable rock star group of math and science educators. I'm not just saying that because I taught one or two of them, but the wealth of knowledge in those committees should not be overlooked. I'm very thankful that I was able to come up here and you made it so easy for me to come and look through all the textbooks. I'm a 15-year science educator. I hold a master's degree in physics. I'm a national board certified science teacher. I've been awarded many fellowships and grants with organizations, one of which would be the ADE. And I have been a physical science unit reviewer for the ADE K through 8, and also helped review and write the elements that accompany the state science standards. And so looking through those materials that were brought up here, I looked at, do they facilitate and support three-dimensional learning? And obviously one of those dimensions, which is the science and engineering practices, can be a little hard to do through textbooks. But the other two, our core ideas and our cross-cutting concepts, are very well served by having good resources that use accurate and modern scientific research to teach the kids what other scientists have already done. And looking through those, Savas Learning did an excellent job, K through 8, and in high school. And I know, we all know why people are here to talk about the biology textbooks, but those textbooks are reviewed by biologists, by practicing education researchers, by practicing biology education researchers, by PhDs that have been doing the research in biology to give accurate scientific research so that our students, when they're looking for answers, aren't just going to the internet and typing in questions. Because I watch my students do that all day long. They come up with some really interesting answers to their questions when they do so. Having a textbook that is based in concrete scientific knowledge will help them for years to come, and it's long overdue. So thank you for using the funds for this.
Thank you, Ms. Grimshy. All right, Ms. Myers, Dr. Hernandez, that was our final public comment tied to this line item. Board members, questions, comments, Ms. Hill.
Yes, actually, I have a few questions for you. I'll just kind of go through them. I guess my first question was maybe just kind of answer this for me, and I would like to actually say too that I appreciate all the effort that went into trying to put together a list of possible curricula for us to consider, because I do know that that took an awful lot of work, so I do appreciate all the hard work that everyone put into that, so thank you very much. And getting back to it, on slide number 23, my question was with regard to, do you want to give me kind of a brief description of what environmental science is? Is that referring to climate change? Or are we referring to banning fossil fuels? What are we talking here? What is that?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, environmental science is referring to the study of the impact on the earth. So not necessarily climate change, but human impact, for example, when we build homes in forested type areas. And again, I'd like to remind the board that the environmental science standards put forth by the Arizona Department of Education are the only standards taught in our environmental science courses. So while the text could have, as one of our public members said, there's no perfect solution, it may have other information in it. We are only to teach the Arizona state standards for environmental science.
Okay, so I'm just going to assume though that climate change would be in there, is that right? Is that going to be a part of it, the environmental science? So that literally is going to be a part of it, correct?
Yeah, the science of the environment, yes.
So okay, so if with all of them, they are required to have that through Arizona
yes,
bylaws, basically.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Moving on, since I can't fix that. And so as far as, I guess I was also wondering, and we were discussing a little bit about, you know, obviously the, you know, the curriculum as to how we decide exactly, I guess it was on slide 46, the method of approach. So I guess we can just go there. I think what might be missing from this that I would have at the top is validity. You know, I noticed that that was not there, accuracy and validity. And how do we determine, because each book will be a little bit different, and apparently if we're not using the scientific method, which some books don't, how do we determine fact from fiction? So exactly what are we using to determine truth? Where are we going with that?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, thank you for that question. So in the Textbook Advisory Committee discussions, information did surface and discussion did happen around exactly that. The facts and whether it was outdated information from a scientific space or completely incorrect. And you will notice in the recommendations from the Textbook Advisory Committee to the RFP Committee, it was noted for specific vendors when concerns of validity had arisen in order to make sure the RFP Committee could consider that in scoring method of approach.
Okay, so with considering that, then the scientific method I have always taken as being the way that you verify if something is fact or fiction. So is every single one of these curriculum, does each one actually have and utilize the scientific method? Because if not, we really shouldn't use it. So I'm just wondering, do they all use that for their foundation?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, yes, that is correct.
Well, that's good. Okay, that makes me feel good. All right, so that's good. So we at least have something for the kids to, you know, utilize, because the scientific method, if you're not using it, then you've kind of got nothing. And I was also wondering with, you know, with science taking into account the difference between evolution and creation. I'm assuming they all do evolution, but do any of them reference creation to give people, you know, the kids an opportunity to have both provided for them to do the critical thinking and decide for themselves? Do we mention creation in any of the books?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, again, I'll remind the board that the Arizona Department of Education dictates the standards, and specific to that topic, what's in the standards is exactly what's taught. So if creationism is not mentioned in the standards, it is not taught.
And are you saying that we're not allowed to choose a curriculum that has creation listed as a possibility for the creation of the universe?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, that is not what I am saying.
I'm sorry. So okay, maybe you'll have to re-identify with me then. So are we able to get curriculum that has both listed, or is Arizona bylaws, are the Arizona bylaws going to not allow us to do that?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, we are able to purchase curriculum that has a variety of topics in it, but again, I'll remind the board that we are only to teach what's in the Arizona Department of Education state standards.
Okay, so I guess just dumbing it down, it's a no. So no, we're not allowed to have creations.
So we are able to purchase any curricular resources that we would like to as a district.
Okay. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, so I'm not sure if Arizona was telling us we can't. I'm just trying to understand it, because I think it's worthwhile to let people make their own decisions. I don't think we should eliminate either one, you know, and both should be valid, and at least give children and families the opportunity of choice. And I guess I'm always disappointed. Saxon math isn't there. I'm just saying. My kid used Saxon math. It's rigorous. It's amazing. It's a very, very good curriculum. You can't beat it. So I'm disappointed that it's not even on the list. I don't know if it's too expensive for us. It was expensive for my family. But that's one. Was there no way to get Saxon math?
Would you like to?
Thank you, President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, members of the governing board. With our RFP, the actual solicitation was placed on azpurchasing.org, and 97 prospective vendors were notified. 42 vendors downloaded the solicitation, and 10 were a no bid. The responses that we received were based on the vendors evaluating our RFP and putting together a proposal. We then evaluated the responding vendors with the 5 criteria, and hence then the group that went to the public portion of the solicitation were evaluated. So I don't have a list of all of the vendors that downloaded the solicitation with me today, but this was a prescribed process. It was put out for all qualified vendors to evaluate and to respond to if appropriate.
That's unfortunate. It's possible we just didn't meet the requirements, or they didn't meet, rather, our requirements for what we need for curriculum. But if we can ever get our hands on Saxon math, that would be amazing. I have to kind of agree with Corky with regard to the science curriculum for McGraw-Hill. I have some experience with McGraw-Hill as well. There are some areas where I kind of skipped it because I didn't agree, but for the most part, I thought it was a decent curriculum. I do have a lot of reservations over, I think it's pronounced Savas. I think that's how you pronounce it, but there was a gentleman that spoke earlier with regard to the gender fluidity issue. We have to be very careful here because they're not actually teaching science. They actually are quoted saying, "We now know that sex is not a binary state with just 2 defined outcomes. Because of the complexity of the genes and proteins involved in sex discrimination or determination, many variations exist," is what they're saying. And this is from the author of the book, who said, he made a remark, one of the coolest things about biology is that it's a science that keeps changing. And that science generally doesn't change all that much. It's pretty basic.
Ladies and
The
gentlemen,
basic foundation for science is not a fluid state. The basics, the foundational network doesn't change. So, you know, like I said, I don't believe that to be true. And, you know, don't confuse follow the science with follow the scientist. Science is objective and factual. Scientists can be sold to the highest bidder. So we have to be really careful with, you know, people that claim to be knowledgeable in science. And Savvis, they're kind of getting off the beaten road here. I think they're going into areas that are inappropriate. And I don't think that we should consider that particular curriculum. There are other ones I think we should consider. There's a lot on here I don't like, but I think McGraw-Hill would possibly be a very good second option. But Savvis, we really should not approve Savvis.
President Sandoval and Mrs. Hill, may I comment on what you shared referencing what the gentleman spoke earlier?
Yes, please.
So first, I'd like to read from the Textbook Advisory Committee's overall perception that was part of the public meeting and posted in the minutes that speaks to the information you've shared. Campbell Biology Concepts and Connections, which is a Pearson text, which is for AP Biology, and Miller and Levine Biology, which is the Savvis Biology and Biology book, were the only two texts that received specific feedback. This feedback, as well as other general feedback, which was 4 submissions, tended to be positive. So this is from the public feedback. Public feedback addressed the misattributed biology concepts between the 2 identified texts above. I have the Savvis Biology book. It's the one with the B on the cover, a bright yellow cover. This is the text that's being recommended. This is the text that's being recommended. The quote that you shared is actually from this text. It's a Pearson text, it's AP. This text is the one that we are recommending for board approval. Early on, there was misattributed information that what you read coming from this text came from this text, and that is inaccurate.
Okay, well, that actually is interesting. So they're from that's interesting that they're not the same. And it's, you know, there's a misconception there possibly then with what actually is valid within the book. So I'm just trying to, like I said, wrap my head around it because there are some concerns whether or not, because with biology we have to be very specific and we have to be very accurate and truthful. So, and that makes a difference, you know, depending on obviously which text we are going to be, you know, implementing into the district.
And President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, in my presentation, when I notated the difference between regular biology and honors biology, this is the biology book that's being recommended for both honors and regular, not this text.
Well, thank you. That does clear that up for me because that was a big concern because that's not something we should look at. Although I do have experience, like I said, with McGraw-Hill, and I do like McGraw-Hill. So I'm not as familiar with Savvis, but you know, I do understand if everybody has gone through a lot of work and effort and done the deep dive to see if that's going to be a good placement. And if it doesn't have those, you know, controversial topics in it and it sticks with biological, truthful science, then, you know, we can possibly back that. So I appreciate your information and getting me the correct information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill. Thank you, Dr. Hernandez, for the clarity as well. Dr. Sorensen.
Yeah, when you look at an adoption in this kind of work of something this massive, you know, I look at sort of accountability of the process. So, I mean, I appreciate that we made the minutes public, that the recordings were accessible, that meetings were open. I appreciated the comments from the people who were there to see it. I couldn't see it. I didn't see how the sausage was made. But the public displays in both the North and the South, I don't know, 50-plus professionals on the textbook adoption, 14 on the RFP team. You're talking about meeting multiple times, 550 community submissions for both math and science. It just seems like a tremendous amount of work. And the adoption of textbooks is kind of like some other concepts. I think we are like in the heart of a culture war that's like tearing our community apart. And it just makes me sad that despite that process, I think it just ultimately comes down to trust and trusting in the people. Like, how do we code the information that we got, right? Or is it like a concerted effort to choose this curriculum or that curriculum? And ultimately, I'm going to trust like all of these people that put input into this resource, that we are going to put significant monetary resources into something that's like a 6th and 7th month process. And when you look at the science state standards, is there anything about gender in the Arizona Science State Standards?
President Sandoval, Dr. Sorensen, no.
Is there information on sex chromosomes and meiosis and the splitting of cells?
So President Sandoval, Dr. Sorensen, yes.
Okay. And I disagree because I think the rate, and when you look at like materials from the 90s and the early 2000s, and you look at the rate of change in our world right now, especially in science, and you look at AI and AGI and just the incredible rate of change that happens in the scientific community, like in 1 year, is drastic. Like you think of where our world was in the 90s, right?
This is my chance to talk.
And I mean, Dr. Hernandez, you curriculum people think like curriculum is like the save-all for everything, so I don't agree with some of the comments about these things because it ultimately determines on the teacher and the pedagogy and the instruction. But it is a resource. And when I look at fiscal responsibility and I look at ESSER 3 grants, I mean, I don't know if we'd be able to pull up the money to buy these. Obviously, we haven't if we're using things from the 90s and 2000s. We haven't been able to have these resources. And you said the ESSER grants need to be spent by September 30th, 24. Is that what you said?
President Sandoval, Dr. Sorensen, members of the governing board, ESSER 3, that federal grant funding, concludes and sunsets on September 30th, 2024, but that is a finite date and districts should be planning on June 30th, 2024. So next fiscal year is our opportunity to complete our work using the ESSER 3 grant funding.
Yeah, so we're time-bound on an obvious, lengthy process. And I have no problem with skepticism, and I have no problem with not trusting massive corporations that is textbook and curriculum because it is big business. But it sounds like we've done the work. It sounds like the people in this room have done the work. And I just have to trust those people, you know, and they're good educators, they're bad educators, they're good CFOs, they're bad CFOs. But it sounds like the process was transparent and held us accountable for the work we did. So I appreciate that. And when this does come to an action, I will be approving it or voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sorensen. Mrs. Rooks?
Yes. I have a couple questions, but I do know that, just for clarification, Savvis bought out Pearson. So it's owned by Savvis. But I also wanted to know, because there is so much online curriculum materials and then you have the textbooks, how are we going to ensure that there isn't any other controversial curriculum? Because there are parents that have been frustrated with a lot of that. So how does that process work?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, thank you for that question. Upon award, the curriculum and instruction teams will begin to immediately scope and sequence. And that is where we take the Arizona state standards, we lay them across and to the and as they're doing that, they are looking at the content and giving it that opportunity should anything concerning be surfaced.
And if the adoption goes through, coming fall school year, will there be a lot of outreach then for families? I know that we had a lot put into the adoption process, but I know that there's a lot of working families. So how do we make access to that when the school year starts so that families are aware of new curriculum coming in? And then also touching on, there is textbooks and then there's online materials. How are we going to balance that out in the classroom, just so that there's not one of both?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, make sure I get both of your questions there.
Okay.
The first one with communication, pending award approval. We have several contingency plans drafted depending on the particular vendors and the scope of content with each one. But we will be starting with about this much of the resources in the fall. As Dr. Sorensen alluded to earlier, resources are stuff, and it's really about the instruction, the teaching, and the learning that goes on. So we'll be supporting our teachers and our classrooms and our school leaders with instruction on quality teaching and learning, in addition to this much of each of those resources. With our timelines, we are really at a crunch to start with just the basics in order to get the school year off and running. As Mrs. Myers alluded to earlier, maybe it wasn't you. Our math resources sunset June 30, and so as of June 30, we will have no math resources. So it is imperative that we get these pieces off the ground as much as we can to stay ahead of. So the training and the professional learning opportunities throughout the school year will be cyclical in getting just enough out and ready to go in time for the teachers until we have more time in the summer to be able to address those. But with that comes the communication to parents on what it is we will be rolling out and how we'll be rolling that out so that they are aware of what is in their children's hands at school. Now, with the transition to the digital component in a real blended environment, it gives parents much more transparency quite quickly. So in a blended piece in schools, as developmentally appropriate, teachers will transition between the printed materials and access to the online platform. For example, a teacher may be covering a particular lesson that has a complementary video that comes with it in the curriculum. So they read it, process it, and then have visual media to kind of concrete those understandings. When students are logged in from home, parents will be able to see those same videos and even some helpful tutorials. So I'm doing the math in class with my teacher and I'm at home and mom needs to help me. There's a little video there that we can look at together to be able to do that. So the blended component of when print and digital work well together keeps us focused on 21st century skills, but also keeps us grounded in the content that's being covered in the classrooms.
Okay, appreciate that. I only have one more question because I know it's getting late, but is there any of the content in the Savvis Learning Company that you saw for social emotional learning? Because I know there's a lot of parents that have concerns about that. So is that incorporated in the adoption or the textbook or the online materials, any of that?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Rooks, no, there is not any content connected to social and emotional learning within the particular textbooks that we are recommending. If there was, the Textbook Advisory Committee, in their recommendation to the RFP Committee, left a note to the RFP Committee saying to consider the alignment with Peoria Unified Vision, Mission, Beliefs, and or our strategic plan with safe and welcoming schools.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rooks. Mrs. Ewing?
Thank you. I don't really have any questions for you. I just want to say thank you so much for this comprehensive process that you've done. Thank you to all of those who've spent time doing this. And again, just like Dr. Sorensen said, I trust the process. I trust the educators that were involved in this. I trust Mrs. Myers and Mrs. Hernandez to the process. Just thank you for doing this. And I really appreciate that there was a lot of community input and student input and considering all of those items as the evaluation went on. So I really feel like we have a good percentage of the community who gave input and we're choosing the best for the students as a community. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ewing. Yeah, that was a lot. No, look, just the diligent process that you went through, and I use the word intentionality, and the intentionality that went into this, right? And really the focus on our student success and being relevant, as they enter into, the 21st century. And really your fidelity in making sure that we're aligned with state standards and, and what I do appreciate, and which we absolutely welcome in this boardroom, every board meeting, is, the voices of all stakeholders. So thank you for, really going above and beyond and making sure that all of our stakeholders, had a voice in this process. Dr. Sorensen mentioned, not only the northern sector of the district, but Old Town Peoria, downtown Peoria, and making sure that across this district, all of our communities, had a voice as we went through this process. So it was, the resident experts is what I'm going to call everybody that was involved, who had the input and who touched every bit of the intricacies and processes within this protocol are, in my mind, are highly decorated. We talked about just the experience and the amount of time that you took, and the 30-minute lunches, I believe you mentioned as well. So all of that said, just thank you. It's clear, and thank you for answering all of the board members' questions in a very clear way. This is something that for me, I'm absolutely, I put all of the individuals involved in high regard, and certainly that said, this is absolutely something that I'm in favor of. So I appreciate both of you and your time this evening and walking us through this. I know it's been a ton of work. It's evident in the almost 70 slides. So that said, just thank you both for your time and your efforts, and thank you all for all of your time and efforts in being involved in this process and making sure that, again, our students, are ready and prepared and relevant for that 21st century. So appreciate it. Any other questions, comments? Ms. Myers, Dr. Hernandez, thank you both. Okay, moving down to informational reports. 10.2, Ms. Myers, I'll wait till you get to your seat. So 10.2 is a report on upcoming meetings and events. 10.1 is a report on upcoming meetings and events. Ms. Ari.
President Sandoval, members of the board, nothing additional to add to this evening's report.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Myers, 10.2. Legislative, state, and local updates.
Yes, thank you, President Sandoval, members of the governing board. I do not have a report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. 10.3, budget, facilities, planning, and construction report. These reports on our website for your viewing at your convenience. 10.4, district budget report for the month of April 2023, also on our website. 10.5, district enrollment reports for the month of April 2023, also on our website. And moving down to section 11, other business. 11.1, board member opportunity to readdress agenda items. Ms. Hill, any items that you'd like to readdress?
I guess I forgot to mention that I wanted to congratulate all of the upcoming seniors that will be graduating within the next week, and that's amazing. We're just really proud of being a part of PUSD, and we hope the best for all of them, and thank you to all the parents who got them this far.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Ricks?
No, thank you.
Mrs. Ewing?
No, thank you.
All right, I don't have any items I want to readdress either. 11.2, requests for agenda items for future governing board meetings. Ms. Hill?
None at this time.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Ricks?
I have a few. First one is, I took a couple of notes, but we had a community member who's also a employee discussing the substitute bus driver, what is online versus filling out the forms versus what was voted on at the previous board meeting back in October 2021. So I would like some clarification on that. That could be in a Friday report. We need to look at that and make sure that we're not doing what was kind of said. So, because that would be wrong.
I'll second that.
Okay. The other thing is, I would like a Friday report is fine on how many teacher positions that we are needing to fill this coming fall, because I did see the human resource report tonight. There was a lot of teachers resigning. So if there is a way to see how many positions we will need to fill for the upcoming school year.
I will second.
Okay, thank you. And last is I have had a lot of teachers bring this to my attention, but revisiting the pay scale for new teachers coming into the district and how they're making more than teachers who've been here longer with, different degrees. So I know that that was voted on from previous board, but I would like to have a discussion on that because I know that there's actually a lot of teachers that left the district because of that whole problem. So if there's a way to revisit that at a future governing board meeting.
Okay. Ms. Vesely, do you have any questions on that for clarity or?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay. And you're wanting on a future governing board meeting for discussion, is that right? To
Yeah.
kind of look at that picture and.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll certainly open to that discussion. I'll second that, Ms. Contra.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ewing?
I don't have anything to add, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I just have one item. I know this is something that the district has been working on and, after other discussions with stakeholders. Mr. Molino, can we get have a discussion on, or have facilities present, somewhat of a phased approach to integrating gender-neutral restrooms, in our gen ed buildings in the district, and also, maybe what that may cost, and then maybe collaboration with Ms. Myers, what funding sources we might have, to be able to, accommodate those. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, like I said, I know some of the district's been, discussing and working on, so I'd love to kind of see the, kind of what that looks like, in a future governing board meeting, please.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Ms. Conjure, any questions on that?
No, sir, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to, because we had to move around kind of our agenda this evening, it's looking a little bit different than it typically would, but board members, I will need a motion to move into executive session pursuant to ARS 38-431.03 and discussion or consideration of employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, demotion, dismissal, salaries disciplining, or resignation of a public officer, appointee or employee of any public body, and discussion or consultation for legal advice with the attorney or attorneys of the public body in order to consider its position and instruct its attorneys regarding contracts that are the subject of possible negotiations, as well as legal advice regarding employment of the superintendent. The employee subject to discussion has been provided with written notice of the executive session and is appropriate, but not less than 24 hours for the employee to determine whether the discussion or consideration should occur at a public meeting. I just need a motion on that. And Ms. Contra, I don't know that the person motioning needs to read the entire, okay. Perfect. Just need a motion to move into executive session.
I will motion.
I'll second that. Ms. Contra, if you can, we have a motion by Ms. Meyer, or Ms. Ewing, and a second by myself. Board members, please cast your votes. All right, motion passes with 5 yeas. Ladies and gentlemen, just to give you expectations, after exec session, we'll come out and return to public only to adjourn. So just FYI. Five minutes? Yeah. Let's do that.